From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Here's what's ahead. Over from the Farm Service Agency State Office, Carla Wicoff will go over the details of the just-announced general sign-up for the Conservation Reserve Program, as well as the opportunities under the continuous CRP. She'll talk about the revisions in the program as a result of the 2018 Farm Bill, including much more relaxed rules on haying and grazing of CRP acreage. Then, from the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen will tackle the question of whether a farmstead windbreak would qualify for depreciation under current income tax rules. And later on, with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven, here on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
This is the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. The news came out a few days back, and this became effective this past Monday, the 9th of December. The USDA is providing more opportunities for you producers to enroll land in the Conservation Reserve Program, including the first general CRP sign-up in some time. Along with us from the Farm Service Agency, State Headquarters for Kansas, Conservation Program Specialist Carla Wicoff, to fill us in on the particulars here. So CRP is back, Carla, and there are a lot of specifics involved, aren't there?
Yes, there are, and we're really excited to be able to start signing producers up. It's going to be a big year for us, I think, and Conservation Reserve Program is a voluntary program that's between the government, the federal government, and ag producers, and it is to establish long-term conserving covers on ground that will help with soil erosion, improve water quality, and develop wildlife habitat. It's a 10 to 15-year contract, and the government then provides an annual rental payment for that's based on non-irrigated cash rent prices.
Kansas has been an active participant, to say the least, in CRP since the inception of this program some 3 decades back now. There is significant acreage in Kansas already participating in CRP.
That's right, Eric. Kansas has just under 1.9 million acres that's enrolled in CRP, and we're going to get busy helping producers re-enroll those acres, the ones that want to do that. Just to let you know, too, we have just over 522,000 acres that will be expiring September 30th, 2020. So that is part of this sign-up, and so we're going to get busy helping producers with signing up in that program.
Well, to refresh the memory on how those rental rates are set for CRP participation leading to the annual payments.
Right. So for establishing those annual rental rates, we use the relative soil productivity based on the physical location of the land that they're offering in CRP. And that's all based on an average dryland cash rent. One thing the 2018 Farm Bill did was for general sign-up offers, that rental rate is subject to an 85% rate. So they're not getting the full 100% now with the new Farm Bill. They get 85% of the rate that's set for that specific land. And then on continuous sign-up offers, that rate will be 90%.
Mm-hmm. And there's yet another change, you say, in as far as what will be covered with the payments. Management practices of established CRP ground had received some support in the past, but that has been changed.
That's correct. Within the CRP program, the government helps with a cost share program to help those covers become established for installing those practices. Part of that process in the past, we have cost shared with any required management practices. And with the new Farm Bill, they have removed that option to have any cost share on management practices. Now, they are still going to have to do management practices, but there won't be a cost share for that any longer.
So let's break this down by the two different sign-up approaches. The general sign-up, it is now rolling. Tell us about what's involved here, including the criteria for qualifying.
Okay. On general sign-up, that sign-up began December 9th, and it is going to run through February 28th, 2020. So you don't have to rush to your offices to get this done right away. In fact, I recommend you wait just a little bit. We're actually still receiving policy and procedure. We've gotten some of the information, but we are still lacking some of the details. But the general sign-up is a competitive process. So when you come in and sign up for general sign-up, you have opportunities based on covers, and those include wildlife habitat benefits, water quality benefits, enduring benefits, the air quality, and also the cost based on the soil rental rate that's being offered on that specific piece of ground. But all of those items come together to include an environmental benefit index, and so once the sign-up is over and all the offers are taken, then the national office gathers all the information together and they rank each one of those offers based on those environmental benefit points that have been given based on, a producer deciding what type of cover they wanted to put on that ground. And they decide then which offers they're going to accept and which offers they want.
Based on the funding that's available.
Right.
And so that EBI ranking will happen sometime after February the 28th,
right.
The close of the signing.
Right, that's correct.
And there's something of a retroactive feature here in that since it's been a while since the last general CRP sign-up, the FSA will be contacting, you say, previous contract holders about re-upping in the program.
Right. Any eligible expired contracts, producers will be getting letters to tell them that they have an opportunity to possibly come in and submit an offer. And those are for CRP contracts that expired September 30th of 2017, 2018, and 2019. And also, as I mentioned before, it's going to include CRP contracts that are going to expire in 2020. Under the general side of that. And we'll talk a little bit more about the continuous here in a little bit. There's another little caveat to that too. So main thing to remember is if you have interest in the general sign-up portion of CRP is to be sure and get in your offices by February 28th.
Well, Carla, tell us about the continuous CRP and the details in as far as qualifying for it.
Continuous CRP is environmentally sensitive land, so they tend to be smaller acreage type practices, more like a grass waterway, contour grass strips, filter strips, or windbreaks, those type of things. And wetland practices are included in that too. If it's new acreage or it's acreage that's already expired in the past, you can sign up at any time for that continuous process. We do ask, and they have set a deadline of August 21st for you to get into the office and get the sign-up completed for continuous, and that allows us time to get through the whole process and get the contract approved before September 30th, which is a requirement for us. Any producers that have continuous CRP-type practices that are expiring September 30th, 2020, you can submit an offer up to 6 months prior to expiration. So those people will need to wait till April 1 to start offering that acreage into. So they have kind of a little different date in there for those continuous options.
There are a lot more options that can be considered here. We do want to mention one thing, though, that was a result of the Farm Bill. Modifications in the haying and grazing provisions on CRP, either continuous or the general sign-up, correct?
That's correct. And we don't have all of the details on this. We kind of have some general information on haying and grazing. But one of the great things, and I'm really happy to be able to provide you with this information, is that they've opened it up quite a bit. And there was a practice in Kansas. We have a lot of land in a practice, CP25, which is, I think, enduring benefit practice. In the past, you've never been able to hay and graze that unless there was a really dire situation like the drought. And we got special permission from the national office to do that. Now they've included that as an eligible practice to be able to hay and graze. Now, of course, we always have our rules, and there are forms to sign before you start that process. And we also have to have a conservation plan, which NRCS, they're our technical provider, and they help out with that part. One thing about that, too, we mentioned management practices. You still have to do those, but we're not going to cost share on them anymore. One thing within the hay graze section is that there's a grazing for management practice in there, and there's no payment reduction for using that. The little bit we know about it right now, it's considered a high-intensity, shorter period of time for grazing for that type of practice. And it's still the same under emergency hay graze when counties qualify for that. There's no reduction in that, but they just have to meet that criteria to be able to do it. But once again, same thing. You always have to come in and fill out forms before you start doing any haying and grazing on land. So visit your local office to have them help you out with maybe what type of practice to put on this, or if you're really interested in whether you have new land or whether you're re-enrolling, visit your local office, and they can sure help you out with that process.
Well, new variables within the entire program that producers will want to examine. But you, again, Carla, would like folks to be patient because there are important details on all of this drifting in day by day. So might give it a week or two before they go and visit with their FSA personnel.
And one other item I might mention, too, is there are fact sheets that kind of just highlight different areas of the program. So you can go on our FSA website, FSAUSDA.gov, and there's all kinds of information. If you click on the Conservation Reserve Program area, there's all kinds of information there to help you out.
Well, we appreciate you letting us know what's developed with CRP. Carla, we'll talk again soon, undoubtedly. Many thanks to you.
Thank you.
She's a Conservation Program Specialist with the Farm Service Agency State Office for Kansas, Carla Wicoff. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we'll be back on the K-State Radio Network. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Agriculture Today returns now on the K-State Radio Network. Once more, we'll spend some time talking about a development in the field of agricultural law. Joining us from the Washburn University School of Law, a professor of agricultural law and taxation there, Roger McEowen. We see windbreaks as common features across the Kansas landscape and elsewhere. Roger, what we want to do today is talk about the tax treatment, if you will, of windbreaks as something that's installed on a farm or ranch. You've received the question of whether a windbreak is actually a depreciable product for taxing purposes.
Well, that is the question. Of course, they're used to minimize soil erosion and protect buildings and structures on a farm or a ranch. If they are depreciable, then that's a current deduction. But if they're not, then the cost of the windbreak itself has to be capitalized and added to the basis of the land that they're placed on. So that's really the question. Can you get an upfront immediate tax break, or do you have to simply add the cost of the windbreak to your land basis and then only be able to recover that upon eventual sale of the land because you have a higher basis and less gain?
And to address the question, need to remind us, if you would, about how depreciation works, the basics of the depreciation laws.
Sure. Well, depreciation applies to property that's either tangible personal property that's used in the taxpayer's trade or business or for the production of income and has a determinable useful life of more than a year. So land itself is not depreciable. You would say, well, it is used in the taxpayer's trade or business, for example, for a farmer and for the production of income, so it meets those tests, but it doesn't have a determinable useful life. According to the IRS, land never wears out. It doesn't exhaust. and so you can't depreciate land. Now, you might be able to depreciate structures on the land or earthen improvements, and we'll get to that in a moment, but the land itself is not depreciable because of a lack of a determinable useful life, and that's really where the IRS tries to dig on this. Mm-hmm. They will basically take the position that, well, a windbreak is too closely associated with the real estate and therefore not depreciable. But there are finer points in the analysis than just that.
And it's interesting, something of a sidebar here, but some trees can be depreciable if they're produce-oriented.
Sure, yeah. There is a specific category in the depreciation rules that say that if you have trees and vines that produce nuts and fruits, then that is a specific class of depreciable property. But a lot of windbreaks do not consist of trees and vines that produce nuts and fruits. We use pine trees, we use other types of shrubs and other trees that are not in that specific category of depreciable asset. And so the question is a windbreak consisting of the types of trees that aren't trees and vines that produce nuts and fruits depreciable?
Now, this question has been addressed in court along with others that might be considered aligned with it about earthen improvements, as it's put. And that would be things that are done to the land to improve its functionality, its value. And you might walk us through some of those decisions that have been rendered in the past.
Yeah, and there is a long history of case law on this, but earthen improvements are generally not depreciable unless the taxpayer can establish that the earthen improvement is physically deteriorating. In other words, it wears out, it exhausts, so we can figure out a determinable life of that earthen improvement. So you have to show that it's physically deteriorating and that without maintenance, it would become worthless. And there are cases on this issue going back into the 1950s. Plus, expenses for maintaining an earthen improvement should be deductible as repairs. So common items on a farm that are included in the land improvement category would be silage bunkers and concrete ditches and waterways and pond outlets, wells that are used for irrigation and livestock watering. Those all fall in that category of earthen improvements. And then the question is, if you can show that it wears out, that there's an exhaustion factor, you might be able to get a depreciation deduction associated with that improvement.
Mm-hmm. As the courts have ruled based on certain circumstances. But what about a windbreak? And this has been directly addressed in court action, has it not?
Yeah, it has. The issue with a windbreak, it seems like it's an earthen improvement that's used in the farmer or rancher's business. They're planted to reduce moisture evaporation and soil erosion, as I pointed out just a bit ago. And, we do have that category for trees and vines that produce nuts and fruits that are depreciable as 10-year property. But there is no specific depreciation category for trees and bushes planted as a windbreak that don't also produce nuts and fruits. And, in fact, there was a case decided by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit in 1997 involving a taxpayer that bought a Montana wheat ranch, and the prior owner had placed a couple 100,000 trees on this large ranch as a windbreak to prevent the soil from eroding and protect buildings. And the court ruled that the windbreak and the trees and bushes, they were Russian olive trees and Caragana bushes. They were planted in rows perpendicular to the wind by a prior owner, and on this 3,700-acre wheat farm, they were, in essence, the court said, agreeing with the IRS, part of the land and not depreciable because, again, land doesn't have a determinable useful life. It doesn't wear out, at least in theory. So he couldn't establish that the windbreak had a limited life or was associated with a depreciable asset. Plus, the court, and I think this is a key point, the court said, look, there is another code section that gives you a tax benefit associated with windbreaks. Windbreaks are specifically listed in the definition of non-depreciable soil and water conservation expenses that are eligible for a deduction under Section 175. And so the court said, well, if we hold that windbreaks are depreciable, the specific inclusion of windbreaks in Section 175 of the Code as a non-depreciable land improvement eligible for a soil and water conservation expense deduction would be, in essence, written out of the code. We would just reason our way out of the usefulness of that provision. So because the prior owner of the farm that incurred the cost of planting the windbreak could have deducted the cost under Section 175, the buyer of the farm couldn't allocate part of the purchase price of the ranch to the windbreak and claim a depreciation deduction.
So again, the court is saying that there is, if you will, tax relief for those who would implement a windbreak in the form of expensing that windbreak. And you might expand on what's allowed there under IRS code.
Yeah, and see, this is the key to this case. This fellow, he wasn't the one that planted the windbreak, so he was not entitled to the soil and water conservation expense deduction. He bought the farm, but because the prior owner could have claimed the deduction under Section 175, that, the court said, precluded him from claiming that deduction, and it's not depreciable. So it was kind of stuck, and that's a key point. But soil and water conservation expenses that qualify under Section 175 have to be paid or incurred for soil or water conservation purposes with respect to land used in farming. So it's just a farmer-specific provision. Or for the prevention of erosion on farmland and be consistent with a soil conservation plan or an endangered species recovery plan. That's part of the code requirement. And you got all types of qualified expenses that can fit under Section 175, and one of those would be expenses for a windbreak that are contained in that categorical list that's in Section 175.
So when it comes down to the answer to the question, it's fairly clear and definitive that windbreaks will not qualify for depreciation.
That's correct, because they are specifically listed in Section 175 as a non-depreciable item. You can take the cost of establishing the windbreak stand as a soil and water conservation expense deduction, but the courts and the IRS have been pretty clear, courts agreeing with the IRS, that windbreaks are not depreciable assets.
But to finish this out, as you note in your article, if it is an earthen improvement, it can be depreciated if it's a legitimate decline in the function of that earthen improvement.
That's exactly correct. The burden is on the taxpayer to show that the item, the earthen improvement, wears out. And in the Montana case, he couldn't show that that was the situation. And so the court said the trees were, in essence, part of the non-depreciable land. So there's still a chance, a slim one though it may be, that a windbreak would be depreciable. But if you're establishing the stand, you can get a current deduction under Section 175 of the code as a soil and water conservation expense.
Very good. Of course, as with any taxable matter, you want to work through what's allowed and what isn't with your tax preparer, as we're heading into that season now for producers and others. And Roger has a write-up on this topic. It's simply entitled, Are Windbreaks Depreciable?, on the blog that he maintains on the website washburnlaw.edu/WALTR. It's always a pleasure, and we'll talk again very soon. Roger, many thanks to you.
Thank you, Eric.
That is Roger McEowen, Professor of Agricultural Law and Taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, who's along with us every other Wednesday to talk recent developments in the field of agricultural law. And once more, if you have not had a look at that blog, do so. In addition to what we covered today, Roger has numerous articles right there handy. Some of the more recent vintage on fence law basics, on tax issues associated with restructuring credit lines, and the groundwater discharges of pollutants in the view of the Supreme Court. Loads of information of relevance to you agricultural producers, and it can all be found again at washburnlaw.edu/WALTR. This is Agriculture Today. We'll return with today's agricultural news headlines and more here on the K-State Radio Network.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. Eric Atkinson with you, and now over to today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, House Democrats announced yesterday that a deal had been reached with the Trump administration over the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. That deal on USMCA will allow the House to vote on the trade pact as early as next week. In a press conference, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said changes agreed to during negotiations with the White House, Canada, and Mexico over labor and environmental standards, as well as over prescription drugs, make the USMCA an improved trade pact, as she put it. Now, USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue is pushing for passing the implementing bill before the end of the year, as we hear from the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue is hailing news that an agreement has been reached between the Trump administration and congressional Democrats on the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA. In a statement, Secretary Perdue calls the deal a big win for American workers and the economy, and especially for farmers and ranchers. He adds that the USMCA will lay the foundation for a stronger farm economy. In a news conference, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi echoed those comments.
There is no question, of course, that this trade agreement is much better than NAFTA.
Both houses of Congress still have to ratify the deal. Secretary Perdue says he is encouraged by the breakthrough and is urging the House and Senate to pass USMCA by Christmas. The USMCA will advance interests in two of the most important markets for American food and agricultural products. This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
To note, however, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell told reporters in Washington that the Senate would not take up the trade deal before the end of the year. McConnell said the Senate would likely wait until after the impeachment trial to vote on USMCA. Getting the agreement to a congressional vote has been, of course, a priority for major agricultural lobbies all year. Mexico's legislature has already ratified the deal, but may need to vote again to agree to some changes made in the text. Canada's government was also waiting for a final agreement with the U.S. before its leadership would bring the USMCA to a parliament vote there. Due to NAFTA, Canada and Mexico are already top trade destinations for U.S. agricultural products, but the USMCA will help assure certainty and no tariffs for most commodities, as well as open up more dairy access into Canada, with estimations there that the U.S. will be able to export roughly $300 million more in dairy products to Canada. Canada would also no longer be able to use a special dairy class pricing to block U.S. exports. Also, under the new agreement, Canada would no longer be allowed to automatically discount U.S. wheat as feed grade. That's a significant change for U.S. wheat producers. The surprises, few and far between in the USDA's new round of crop reports. In fact, the surprises are pretty much missing this month, as we hear from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
Pretty quiet. That's how one USDA analyst described Tuesday's new round of USDA crop reports, none of which likely to cause much of a market stir. For its December supply-demand forecasts compared to November, USDA used the word unchanged quite a lot. We did get a new survey-based forecast for cotton, USDA pegging the crop at 20.2 million bales, down 3% from the last forecast, mainly on lower yields, still up 10% from last year. Corn, no surprises, no changes from last month. Production, 13.6 billion bushels. Year-ending stocks, 1.9 billion. Average farm price still $3.85. That's 24 cents more than last season. Soybeans, USDA sticking with a 3.5 billion bushel U.S. crop. Stocks could drop by half during the marketing year, down to 475 million bushels. Yet, USDA did drop their soybean price forecast 15 cents from last month, down to $8.85, still 37 cents more than this past year. Wheat, analysts say it's a bit more competitive in world markets. Stocks could fall to 5-year lows, but still, USDA chopping a nickel off the price, down to $4.55 a bushel. Gary Crawford, U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
Elsewhere on today's agricultural news page, 2 agriculture groups have filed a legal challenge to a California law that requires hog producers to abide by certain regulations in order to sell pork in California. The National Pork Producers Council and the American Farm Bureau Federation have asked a federal court to decide whether that state can enforce Proposition 12 against farmers in other states. As of January the 1st, 2022, Proposition 12 prohibits the sale of pork not produced according to California's production standards. Proposition 12 applies to any uncooked pork sold in that state, regardless of whether it was raised in California. According to the NPPC, less than 1% of the pork produced in the U.S. meets Proposition 12 requirements. During a radio interview earlier this week, NPPC legal counsel Michael Formica said that the state of California needs about 700,000 sows to satisfy its pork demand. About 1,500 out of California's 8,000 sows are used in commercial breeding housed in small farms. And because that state has to import most of its sows, he said Proposition 12 essentially regulates farmers beyond the state borders. Now, in the lawsuit filed in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of California in San Diego, the agricultural groups asked the court to declare that law unconstitutional in violation of the Commerce Clause. The law, by the way, forbids the sale of whole pork meat in California from hogs born of sows not housed in conformity with the law. Proposition 12 forbids sows from being confined in such a way that they cannot lie down, stand up, fully extend their limbs, or turn around without touching the sides of their stalls or other animals. And the American Royal Association is now one step closer to its future home after acquiring 115 acres in Kansas City, Kansas. The American Royal purchased 47 acres earlier this year, and now the Patterson Family Foundation acquired 80 neighboring acres and signed a 99-year lease agreement with the Royal for 68 of those acres. That provides the American Royal a total of 115 acres for the new complex. The 1 million-plus square foot complex with accompanying outdoor plaza and arena will allow for an expansion of the current 14-week programming at the Royal to 365 days of the year. The facility will feature over 800,000 square feet of indoor programmable event space, including significant barn and exposition areas, 3 performance arenas, 1 warm-up arena, a large educational area with integration throughout the entire complex, and over 50,000 square feet of exhibit space. A ceremonial groundbreaking is expected in the spring of 2020, construction beginning in the summer of next year. The core complex is to be complete by the winter of 2021. A glance to today's agricultural news headlines, and we'll return shortly here on Agriculture Today.
With the shortage of primary care physicians, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State research and extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all social-economic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
Tell me what a real winter day is for you. A winter day.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
Tell me what a real winter day is for you. Don't tell me that it's freezing cold or snowing or when the truck won't start early in the morning. Yes, I admit they are all winter experiences. But what about the winter day as opposed to a summer day? I'll tell you what it is for me, and I think most of you who live in the country might agree. At least you'll recognize the kind of day. To experience my winter day, it must be a day without sun. It may be a watery, cold sun, but surely not a bright, sunny day. Lightly overcast will do. If it gets to be late afternoon, I like to see some redness, rosy color in the low clouds. I want to drive a winding country road through a wide valley with cropland. The crops, corn, have been harvested. Maybe there's still a short stubble standing on the field to hold some cows for the time being. But as I drive by, the daylight is just starting to diminish. I drive slow, enjoying the winter day. And then, to top it off, I see what makes my day. a flock of crows, beautiful black crows, who enjoy their lazy togetherness. As I approach, they fly just low to the ground, going nowhere, but with a kind of a hopping flight, they move. Not far, but just far enough, with nonchalance. For me, seeing and watching that makes the perfect winter day. Driving out to the farm and passing the harvested corn and soybean fields of my neighbor, I've watched several flocks. They were not large flocks. These flocks are about 50, maybe 100 birds. It's the common crow, also called the American crow. As I watch it fly and partly tumble, not putting in much effort, I think it is a beautiful bird, with its glossy black plumage and heavy, stout beak. I wonder if it is the same bird my brother as a youngster had tamed. That is a long time ago. The crow sat on his shoulder. In the old folklore of Europe, crows had a special place. The bird held meaning for the American Indians as well. The bird was wise. While walking the farm, I've noticed the crow announcing my advance and warning other critters, "Caw, caw, caw." While flying, the word raucous has been given to a flock of crows as they roam in the small bands. In groups, they roost, often returning to the same roost in the trees. In late afternoon, they start to drift back home. They will be noisy, then settle by the time dusk has fallen. In the Midwest, we may get crows from Canada to overwinter. I can see why. Our winters are mild compared to winters in Canada. Down south, the crow is a year-round resident. Of course, food is the big factor as they move and fly south, but they never go too far. They are survivors. The owls and hawks are not their friends. They can outmaneuver the owl and as a mob will attack the owl or hawk. The word murder is associated with the crow, as they may kill a sick crow which once flew with them in the mob from field to field. Here's a poem, On the Crow, by John Burroughs. Listen. My friend and neighbor through the year, self-appointed overseer of my crops of fruit and grain, of my woods and furrowed plain, claim thy tithings right or left, I shall never call it theft. Nature wisely made a law, and I fail to find a flaw. In thy title to the earth and all it holds of any worth, I like thy self-complacent air. I like thy ways, so free from care. Thy landlord stroll about my fields, quickly noting what each yields. Thy courtly mien and bearing bold, as thy claim were bought with gold. Thy floating shape against the sky, when days are calm and clouds are high. Thy thrifty fly, they arise of sun. Thy homing clans, when day is done. Hues protective are not thine, so sleek thy coat each quill does shine. Diamond black to end of toe, thy counterpart the crystal snow. Never plaintive nor appealing, quite at home when you are stealing, always groomed to tip of feather, calm and trim in every weather. Morn till night by woods policing, every sound watch increasing. Hawk and owl in tree-top hiding, feel the shame of thy deriding. Naught escapes thy observation, none but dread thy accusation. Hunters, prowlers, woodland lovers vainly seek the leafy covers. Noisy, scheming and predacious, with demeanor almost gracious. Dowered with leisure, void of hurry, void of fuss and void of worry. Friendly banded Robin Hood, judge and jury of the wood. Or Captain Kidd of sable quill, hiding treasures in the hill. Nature made thee for each season, give thee wit for ample reason. Good crowit that's always burnished, like the coat her hair has furnished. May thy numbers never diminish. I'll befriend thee till life's finish. May I never cease to meet thee. May I never have to eat thee. And mayest thou never have to fare so that thou playest the part of scarecrow. To watch and see the crows makes my winter day perfect.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. Our time's away for today. As always, thanks to you for tuning in. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.